Hi, network. Welcome to this week's Technical Thursday. Today, we are going to be talking about what is an audit clause and how are audit rights exercised. I did get a little bit of a better camera, a little bit of a better microphone, and we'll be using technology today to walk through a specific example of an audit clause. But before jumping in that example, I wanted to talk about what an audit clause is at a high level. So when a company enters into an agreement with a vendor or a supplier, it may choose to place an audit clause within that agreement. An audit clause is put in the agreement so that the company can then go back at a later time, look at data, documentation, and records to ensure that the vendor and or supplier is following the contractual terms, to make sure that they're being billed correctly and that the financial environment is meeting the expectations of the relationship. Not all master agreements with vendors or suppliers have audit clauses in them. In some cases, an audit can be performed, even if there is not an audit clause in a relationship, because a vendor or a supplier will want to participate in an audit just as a gesture of good faith with a strategic client of theirs. But our recommendation is, whenever possible, to put an audit clause in a significant relationships contract. That will always allow a company to kick the tires, make sure that things are operating as expected and that they're actually gathering the value that they're negotiating. So with all that, let's go ahead and jump into an example here of an audit clause. Now, audit clauses can vary dramatically in different environments and based on the culture of the company that's executing those audit clauses. In some cases, they're very specific. They define the time period, they define what data can be gathered, they define who can participate in the work. In some cases, they're extremely vague and they only have a couple of sentences that just allude to the idea that an audit can take place. The example we're walking through today is kind of a middle of the road audit clause, not very specific, but not overly vague. I think it's a good audit clause, and we'll walk through it sentence by sentence and talk about what the different provisions are saying. So with that, let's jump on in. So the first sentence here says the supplier shall at all times keep books, records, and accounts at its place of business, office, showing the actual costs and expenses that the supplier incurs in connection with the services. This is essentially an expectation being set up that, hey, you're going to have to hold on to records in your environment so that we can perform an audit, right? What you don't want to have happen is when you reach out to your supplier or your vendor to perform work and ask for documentation, they say it's been deleted, it's been shredded, it's not available, okay? So this sets an expectation that the supplier will hold on to records, books, and other documentation necessary for the audit. The next sentence is going to tell us how long do they have to hold on to it. So ABC Inc., that's the company who we're representing theoretically, or its duly authorized representative shall have the right during the term of this contract and for 2 years after its termination to enter upon reasonable prior request and at a reasonable time supplier's office to examine and audit at ABC Inc.'s sole expense the books, records, and accounts that pertain to this agreement. That's a long sentence saying a few things here. One, it's saying we have the right to perform an audit while we're still under this agreement. Two, once this agreement is over for 2 additional years, we also have the right to perform this audit work, meaning that this relationship could end tomorrow, and in 6 months, we could still kick off an audit and be within our contractual rights to do so. It does set an expectation that there's reasonable prior written request sent out to the vendor or supplier in this case to make sure that they're aware that is going to be taking place. And it also sets an expectation that the timing's reasonable. And this is important because, depending on month-end close or seasonality of business, there may be certain times of the year where it's unreasonable for a client or a company to ask for a supplier to participate and support an audit. In this case, we do have language that says that this will be performed on site at the supplier's office. This is typically not the case. In some engagements it is, but as things have become more virtual, especially with 2020 moving on, these are typically done remotely. But technically this provision, you could make an argument says that it has to be done on site at the supplier's location. So moving forward, upon reasonable prior written request, supplier shall make all books, records, and accounts that pertain to this agreement available to ABC Inc. or its representative for the audit. So what is this saying? Essentially, this is broad, which is we generally recommend our clients to place broad language in there that gives them as much rights as possible. But in this case, it's saying anything that would relate to your billings, any books, records, or accounts, we have the right to be able to inspect it. Now, in some specific situations, a supplier vendor may push back during the negotiation and place a restriction in the audit clause that says you cannot look at this, or this is off limits. Obviously, if that's placed into the audit clause, that would not be allowed to be within the scope of the engagement. So the other thing that's notable throughout this provision is it allows both the company or its representatives to perform the audit work. This is critical to be placed into any audit clause because most companies actually don't have the resources and time to perform this work themselves. So 99 out of 100 times, an audit is being performed by an outside audit firm. Anyways, I appreciate everybody who's made it through this point of the Technical Thursday. I think hopefully that's helpful to those, I think specifically in the procurement space around what an audit clause is, what the language typically looks like, and what it's used for. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and we'll see you next Thursday. Thanks. Bye.